Well, two big games there, and we're going to focus on City. Ahead of the start of match day 7, they sit on 8 points from 6 games in this new league format, meaning that their future in the competition almost certainly lies via the playoffs. This match day, as Mark says, they travel to Paris to face Paris Saint-Germain, who are in an even more perilous position and sit outside the playoff qualification spots.
City's position has obviously been harmed by that disastrous run of form that they had in November and December. Not only did they fall way off the top spots in the Premier League, but also had some disastrous Champions League results. Threw away a 3-goal lead against Feyenoord, were hammered by Ruben Amorim's Sporting Lisbon, and also lost to Juventus. So in a little bit of trouble in the Champions League as well as the Premier League.
And while a 6-0 win against Ipswich this weekend might indicate they're back towards their best, there's definitely a feeling that this is the start of a new phase for the club. Mark, you've written this week about how a super club empire falls. What have you identified as the telltale signs?
Well, I think there's just 3 trends, and I think these are trends that I spotted with Liverpool in 1990, probably 89-90, and United around the Fergie era. And City are beginning to reflect or repeat some of these issues that have kind of befell Liverpool and Man United. So first of all, there's a result that shocks everybody, a result that comes completely out of the blue. Liverpool lost to Crystal Palace in the FA Cup semi-final in 1990. I mean, a few months earlier, they'd beaten Palace 9-0 in the old First Division. So that sort of result. And then United, I think the 6-1 at home to Man City in the derby in 2011-12 was a game which that really kind of set in tone the growth of Man City, and it showed that United were a team in decline. So, and then you've got issues such as senior people leaving the club, senior figures, senior executives who let the club run smoothly with astute decisions and a bigger picture. That happened to Liverpool and Man United in 1990 Liverpool, and in 2012-13 at Old Trafford. So, and again, City are losing key personnel, as you know, at the end of this season. I think the final one is just bad recruitment, when the magic touch of signing right players at the right time or letting players go at the right time begins to evade the club. So that happened to Liverpool in a big way. And it happened to United. I think we saw that Sir Alex Ferguson thought he'd left behind a crop of young players that were going to be the future of the club, and they clearly weren't. So poor judgment on behalf of the people charged with recruitment. So City have got into that trap a little bit. They might pull themselves out of it, having made some signings in January, and they've obviously signed Erling Haaland to a big long contract. But there are certain things that if you get it wrong, it can just tailspin pretty quickly. I think we saw that at Liverpool and United. So maybe it happens at Man City as well.
Well, the two other examples you mentioned there, which obviously are, they had managerial changes. City are trying to enter the dawn of a new era by retaining the same manager. How much does that change the rebuild and the pressure around it? And do we think that Guardiola is in this for the long haul? I mean, if this rebuild does take a year, 2, 3 years, is he going to stick around to see it out?
Well, this is the big question. And, obviously Pep signed a new 2.5-year contract in November. And depending who you speak to, some people think he's there for the long term, for the duration of the contract. Some people think he'll be going in the summer. I wish I knew what the answer was. But, I mean, I'm more inclined to believe that he won't see it out. I just don't think that... I just think he looks tired. I think he needs a break. And I think we've seen that on the touchline. We've seen it in his press conferences. We've seen it with his reaction to players. He's had a few issues on the pitch with players, his own players, arguments with certain players. We saw the situation with Stefan Ortega at the weekend. He's had issues with Ederson. I think Jack Grealish has been on the brunt of it as well. So I'm not quite sure Pep is there for the long term. And I think a key part of this is the departure at the end of this season of Chicky Pagurishtan, who's been City's director of football, sporting director, call it what you will, since 2012. He was a massive part in Pep going to the club. City basically hired Chicky because he worked with them at Barcelona. They've got a relationship dating back to the team at the time as players together at Barcelona. They're very, very close. Closer than Gil and Ferguson were, and that was the real axis at United. Chicky's leaving at the end of the season to be replaced by Hugo Vallano from Sporting Lisbon. Now, we don't know how that'll work, but that is a massive key part of the success that City have had. Once Chicky goes, Pep loses his kind of wingman in many ways, and we'll see how that develops. Has Pep got the appetite for a rebuild? That's the big question as well. I mean, City's recruitment in January has been long-term signings or medium-term to long-term signings. They're not players that are going to make a difference right away. So is he prepared to allow them to bed in? Is he prepared to overhaul the players? There are lots of players there that are in the 30s now. There's Gundogan, there's De Bruyne. I think both will leave in the summer. You've got John Stones, you've got Bernardo Silva, you've got Kyle Walker, who would like it to leave this month. So all of a sudden, a lot of the key players of his regime are going to leave or potentially leave. It's a big rebuild. Sir Alex Ferguson did that brilliantly at United, and Liverpool did it over the years between the mid-70s and early 90s. Great players left. Keegan, Souness, Ian Rush, they were all replaced brilliantly until they weren't. And that's the situation City are in right now. Are these great players going to be replaced by better players, or are they going to fall into the trap that United and Liverpool made by signing players that aren't as good and turn out to be nowhere near as good?
I think that we can maybe see some evidence from last summer that Pep isn't that keen for a major rebuild. He was offered the chance to sign more players in the summer and turned it down. He's done a press conference relatively recently where he kind of suggested that bosses, whether that was Begiristan or Soriano or the recruitment staff, were kind of almost sort of pushing him into making signings. And he said, no, I don't want to do that. I want to carry on with the bulk of the squad that I've already built. These kind of, the not old stages, but the kind of experienced guys like De Bruyne and Walker and people that he wanted to kind of carry them through one more season and see what they could do. And I think that injuries has played a part, but also maybe decline has happened a little bit quicker than perhaps Pep thought and perhaps the everyone else at City thought. And now you're faced with a situation where you're having to make not panic signings, but you're having to spend an awful lot more money in January than you would ever expect. And then, as Mark says, you're looking at a situation where you've got an awful lot of kind of players over the age of 30 who need replaced in the summer. I would be amazed if Pep Guardiola has the energy to see that through, because he was already talking 18 months ago about coming towards the end of his time at Man City, and just have to be in a couple of his press conferences, particularly after the World Club Cup in Saudi Arabia last December, where he was talking. He gave a resignation speech without actually resigning. He talked about closing a chapter. We're done. We've closed a circle. We're finished with what we started. It's all over, kind of thing. And then he was obviously forced to start again because he was in the middle of the season. As Mark said, there's an awful lot of people at City who don't think that he will see the end of that contract extension that he's just signed. That, part of his motivation to sign it was to kind of stop the questions about his future. When are you going to go? When are you going to go? Are you going to carry on? Are you going to sign it? He looks like a guy who's done absolutely everything at City. And to be faced with a situation where, you come out such a fantastic spell of success and then been told, right, that was great, let's start again. For a guy who's done it all, that surely in his head he's thinking, really? He's got golf to play in the Maldives and things. He's got other things he wants to be doing.
Yeah, I think we talk about the trigger result as well. I've referenced Liverpool and the Man United results. I think for City, the one that stands out for me has been a game that set the alarm bells ringing was the cup final last season against Man United. I mean, they went into that game as overwhelming favourites, on course to do the double again. They just won the treble the season before. Nobody gave United a chance because United went into that game, lowest ever Premier League finish. Eric Ten Hag was facing the sack, and United beat them. And United had a plan to beat them. And I think these results that shock you, they're the results that give opponents and rivals the thinking that actually these guys aren't as invincible as we thought, and the cracks appear. And they started this season in a similar vein, that teams are now playing City without the fear that they once had, because they know that if a team like United, a weak United team, can beat them, then so can they. And I think so many teams have taken City apart at times this season. So I think it's easy to say, we look at Liverpool and United with the benefit of hindsight, and with 20, 30 years in some cases benefit to look at that. But I think in future, when we look back at this City team when it started to break up, I think the cup final defeat against United we're seen as a significant moment when a lot of things changed.
There was also a similar situation, wasn't it, to a lesser extent with Arsenal, James? I mean, you'll know more about that. There was a similar, to a lesser extent, when Arsenal went through the same thing. They didn't have a period of success that was in the same kind of length or vein that Liverpool, Man United and City have had, but a similar situation where they were kind of the top dogs in England for a spell and fell off in a similar way.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously it happened slightly differently with Arsenal in that, the manager who had overseen their greatest successes was, overseeing what became really a terminal decline. And, you had this really bizarre sort of situation where it sort of split down the generations, that the older, fans inside Emirates Stadium were saying, look, lay off this guy. This is the guy who's given us the invincible season. He's given us, 2 doubles. He's an absolute legend of the game, not just of Arsenal. But over time, when they, were falling away from challenging the title to scrambling to finish in the top 4, and they were, selling players left, right, and centre to self-fund the move from Highbury to the Emirates and the financial difficulties that followed in those years, there were younger and younger fans coming who were saying, look, I want to watch a team win. I'm paying the highest season ticket price in England, and I'm watching a team that can't, defend and has all these cyclical problems. It lacks leaders. It's got a manager who doesn't look like he's got the answers. And if we're just judging him on the last 5 years, the last 7 years, the last 8 years, the longer that trophyless run went on, it's hard to sort of make the case for this guy, Arsene Wenger, still knowing, being the right man to take the club forward. And eventually that control was wrestled away from him. But I'm sort of quite curious to know whether you think City, for example, would be looking at what happened at United and what happened at Arsenal and think, is there a degree of succession planning with and without Pep here that we don't want to make the same mistakes that other clubs have made? But, I know for a fact that at Arsenal, they did look at United and what happened post-Fergie and think, well, okay, because there's such similar comparisons. Two men run the club top down, autonomous control. How do we kind of avoid that? And Arsenal made some big mistakes, don't get me wrong. It's not as if they learned from them and it's been smooth sailing. But do you think that City, people at City are looking at the examples from the past, like we're talking about with Fergie, like we're talking about with Arsene Wenger, and think there are lessons to be learned here?
Yeah, I mean, just for the benefit of Arsenal fans wondering why I didn't include Arsenal in this feature, is because Arsenal didn't really have an empire under Wenger. United and Liverpool had empires that won back-to-back titles. They won European trophies. They took it to a different level than Arsenal. Now, Arsenal were very successful under Wenger, but in many ways they were successful in the years that United weren't, apart from the Invincibles years. So that's the reason why. And obviously Arsenal's decline had a lot to do with issues that are unique to them. The new stadium, like you mentioned, James, that they had to pay for that. So they didn't really have the same high. They didn't scale the mountain as high as Liverpool and United did, or City have done. And I think their fall was a bad one, but it wasn't quite as bad because it hadn't scaled the heights as such. So, but in terms of replacing a genius, United had to do that, and so did Arsenal. And both have shown that it's not possible to do it like for like. And I think City, we don't know what City's plan is. I think City's plan has clearly been, every time that Pep looks like he's leaving, is to give him a big new contract, because there's been probably 2 or 3 times when we thought that Pep would go and he didn't do. So City are maybe kind of just putting it under the carpet and thinking, hopefully one day this will go away. And if Pep is still young enough to stay, but who knows what the succession plan is? Over the years, I've heard different names mentioned. I think Mikel Arteta's been one, but I'm not quite sure that he ticks the boxes. Got to win something big first. He's got to stop being the nearly man. I think, Brendan Rodgers was mentioned at one point, but again, Brendan Rodgers is never going to be the Man City manager now. Mauricio Pochettino, again, did well, tailed off, now managing the US. So there's no obvious candidate out there. Julian Nagelsmann's been mentioned. Ruben Amorim was mentioned because Hugo Viana had left Sporting Lisbon to go to City at the end of this season, but obviously Amorim's now at United. So there's no obvious candidate out there. Patrick Vieira, another name I'm going to chuck in because he was being groomed as their long-term successor. Brought the academy through, went to New York City FC, but again, Vieira's not in the running now. So I think they're probably having that same situation that we're sitting here thinking, who is the guy? But I think City's infrastructure is much stronger than United was. And I think they don't have the issue that Arsenal had, in the sense that having to pay for a ground, and we know that City have got incredible resources, but obviously we don't know what's going to happen with the 115 Premier League charges. I think what happened at Liverpool was very similar to what happened at United. A team got old and a big manager, in their case, Kennedy Dalglish, left a big hole. So I don't think City will have the same problem in the sense that Liverpool had with a manager, but I do think they're going to have a problem with just finding a way to replace a genius. And I think just to add to the cheeky departure, we can't overlook the fact that Omar Barada left as chief operating officer to go to Man United. Jason Wilcott left as well to initially go to Southampton and has now ended up at United. So over the last 18 months, they have seen a lot of senior people go, but the key people are still there. The chairman is still Khaldun Al-Mubarak. Ferran Soriano's still there as CEO. I think City is strong enough and well placed to move on, but Pep is such a big figure that I think his departure, whenever it is going to be one that City's going to find really hard to overcome.
Well, as Rob said earlier, Guardiola has conceded in the last week that maybe he was wrong telling the club that he didn't need to make any signings last summer. In the last week, they've made moves for Lens centre-back Abdulkadir Kuzunov, Palmeiras centre-back Vitor Reyes, and Eintracht Frankfurt's Egyptian forward Omar Marmoush. Now, that indicates that he does regret not signing players in the summer and that they've had to sort of rectify that this month. Rob, do you think the failure to update the ageing squad last summer will end up being the defining moment for the end of this empire, or can these signings hit the ground running and get them out of trouble this season?
Yeah, I mean, that's the golden question. I mean, I think that if this season is to carries on in the same vein as the start of the season, it will be remembered as kind of that summer will be remembered as kind of the turning point of City's empire, because ultimately, I think that the biggest reason that these empires all collapse is recruitment. You know, you start making really, really poor choices. You start chasing your tail in terms of recruitment. You don't get the timing right with signing players and bringing in. That's obviously something that City have already admitted to sort of last summer. Again, though, Mark is right in that City have given themselves, or have got the best chance to kind of pull themselves back from the brink in a way that maybe Man United and Liverpool couldn't do, because if City bring in these players and they hit the ground running, particularly someone like Marmoush, who is a risk, but if he comes in and scores a load of goals, then suddenly you're a far better team. And then you go and sort of spend more money in the summer, they're probably still in that zone where you can rectify the mistakes that have gone before. Whereas with United and Liverpool, United in particular, they just couldn't ever drag themselves back. They made mistake after mistake after mistake in terms of recruitment. And they ended up having to sign players to replace the guys that they'd signed to replace the other guy before. And it just doesn't ever work. You know, all these super clubs, all these empires get into a sweet spot in terms of recruitment where the squad is so strong and so well balanced in terms of age profile and position profile that every sort of summer you're only looking to add maybe one or two players. And it's a lot easier to do that than if you're approaching a summer having to sign 4, 5 and 6. And that there isn't really much evidence to suggest that you can sign 7 players in a summer and then go on to be immediately successful. The only team I can think of in recent history is when Jose came into Chelsea. And I think he signed 7 players that summer, and then they obviously went on and won the league straight away in 2005. There isn't an awful lot of other evidence to suggest that you can do that kind of squad overhaul and be immediately successful. So if you can get into that sweet spot of recruitment where you're only looking to tweak the squad, it's great. But the minute you fall out of that, you start having to chase your tail, and that's when you make bad choices. So I think we're still in that zone with City where they may be able to pull themselves back, but it'll depend an awful lot on how good Marmoush is, because they're paying a lot of money for him, and it'll depend a lot on how good their recruitment is in the summer. And that's not going to be easy because, as Mark has already said, you're asking Hugo Viana to come in straight off the bat and make some signings that are going to get City right back on track as Premier League contenders. And that's really tough for a guy to come in and have to do that, particularly when you're following someone like Cheeky Begiristan, who's been so successful.
I mean, that, for me, you mentioned there, James, you talked about Pep saying last summer that he didn't need to strengthen his squad and he regrets that. There's real kind of echoes with Ferguson there. A complacency almost setting in that these players have been so good for him that he doesn't need to strengthen at a certain point now. Time will tell, but is Kuzinov another Phil Jones, or is he Nemanja Vidic? Is Marmoush, a Robin van Persie, or is he Gabby Obertan? The players that Fergie signed in the tail end of his time at United for the last 3 years, and you could probably date it back to when they saw Cristiano Ronaldo, £80 million to Real Madrid, same summer they let Carlos Tevez go to Man City. Michael Owen came in that summer on a free transfer, Antonio Valenti came in. That gradient of quality went down to the point after 2 or 3 years that it was Smalling, it was Bebby, it was Jones, it was Ashley Young. Players that served United well, but were never anywhere near as good as the ones they had in the past. And it got to the point where they missed summer windows, as Rob said, sweet spot. United missed it 2 or 3 times. City may have missed it 2 or 3 times. Why did they bring Ilkay Gundogan back last summer? That was a bad signing. The perfect decision on Gundogan was letting him go the year before. Gundogan could be their Paul Scholes being brought out of retirement by Fergie. So there are similarities there, but again, we get back to City. The big thing that City got in their favour is they're still top and they've got immense wall to deal with it.
At one point related to that, I think we should touch on is obviously the number of players they've sold from their academy. You look at it now: Cole Palmer, Morgan Rogers, Romeo Lavia, Dawson. I mean, you could list so many of them. I guess linked to that, there've also been, persistent rumours behind the scenes of problems, individuals falling out with Pep. Kevin De Bruyne, probably the most obvious one. Obviously, Kyle Walker's form's fallen off the cliff, looking like he's going to leave. How much of those factors do you think have contributed to this? Firstly, the fact that they've sold players. You talked about complacency earlier. Was there maybe a bit of complacency about selling all of these academy players and thinking, well, we'll just, yes, we need to probably do it for PSR, but we're all right. We can carry on with this, and also selling to rivals as well. It's not as if they're selling these players overseas. They're sort of saying to the rest of the league, we can still sell some of our brightest young talent here, and we can still beat you.
Yeah, it's like an arrogance of complacency, isn't it? That, it's all right, these kids are good, but we won't give them the time that would have got elsewhere. I think some of these players were never going to make it to City, let's be honest, but some of them, had they had another year there, I think they would have made it. I think they really would have made it. I think the Liverpools and Man Uniteds of this world, and Arsenal, Saka, people like that, they don't let their best young players go. They really don't. They keep them there unless there's a financial reason they have to let them go. City haven't really had that. So I think City are now paying the price. Their next team could have been there, ready and waiting by now. Lavia, Cole Palmer, Morgan Rogers, these players, tossing, like you say, that's the backbone of the team. So I think that is an issue. I think the off-field stuff behind the scenes, a lot of players getting old, a lot of players have run the race, a lot of players have probably been there long enough now thinking, Pep is very, very demanding. And they can't take it anymore, thinking, well, look, when they signed for Man City 6-7 years ago, playing for Pep was this was always a destination signing, wasn't it, of playing for Pep Guardiola. They've had 6-7 years of him now being ultra demanding, and they're getting to the point thinking, I've won everything, I don't need to hear this anymore. I think that's part of it as well. That never really happened at United because Ferguson moved them on before they got to that point. And the only players that stayed beyond that were players that were those kids, and they had this kind of incredible loyalty and almost this like father figure element to it. I think Pep hasn't got that. So a lot of things are conspiring together. But what happens, I think, between now and the end of the season will tell us whether City are able to bounce back or whether this really is the start of their decline.